Good to go? Let's do it. Awesome. All right. We'll get rid of the Skynet logo. I'm sure everyone's getting worried that we're going to start taking over computers and start issuing world domination. Welcome to myself, Matt, and Brian's talk. Skynet will use PsExec when sysinternals go bad. Before we get started, how many red teamers do we have in the audience? I see half a hand. Any blue teamers? Okay, all right. Any sysadmins? Any of all of the above? Maybe. Yeah, all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, I do some of that stuff. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully then this talk will serve as enlightening. And we'll all walk away learning a little bit more about how we can use sysinternals to do bad things, infiltrate an environment, and hopefully prevent Skynet from actually taking over. But we'll see. So far, we wouldn't really know if it hit, because all you really need is an SMB vulnerability and someone with some time on their hands, and the world can come to a seeming end. But then all you have to do is not register a domain, and you can end the apocalypse. So this talk should really be Skynet will register all of its domains, but we'd be here for like 30 seconds. So, all right, a little bit about who we are. I'm going to do this in reverse order. My name is Matt Bromiley. I'm the one to the other side of the screen. I'm a senior managing consultant. I'm basically an incident responder. Title is just what's on the slide. I'm also an instructor for the SANS program. I'm also a free and open source software nut as well. I'm not a fan of proprietary software. I hate having to pay for things. I'd much rather do it free if possible. Brian?
I'm Brian Marks. I'm a senior associate at KPMG. Kind of in the realm of DFIR. Is this on? Yeah. And I'm an Elk fanatic. This is probably one of the first talks I've...
Hold it closer.
One of the first talks I've done that isn't Elk related.
All right, so really quick, our agenda as we go through this. You're going to see a bunch of Terminator slides all throughout this, by the way. We couldn't talk about Skynet without having the Doomsday device inside. We're going to talk a little bit about our prediction. Hopefully that's going to line up with a lot of our red teamers. Then we're going to go through some different steps of an attack lifecycle where you can actually use sysinternals. It's going to include recon, deployment, persistence. Deployment we're actually calling execution. And then we're going to talk about some anti-forensics, like how we can catch you at what you're doing. We're going to look at a threat group that uses PsExec in the wild. They're one of, anyone here had a credit card replaced in the past 5 years? Yeah, I would imagine so. We're probably going to talk about the group that was the cause of that. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about Judgment Day when that happens as well. All right, so Brian and I had a lot of discussions for this talk, and we came up with a prediction. And that is, in order to actually take over the world, Skynet's going to have to blend in, because we're way too adept now. If someone starts crawling around our network, we're going to catch them. They're going to need to evade us, and they're going to need to be they're not going to care really about futile endpoint detection. They have one goal, and it's to take over everything. It's not to try and get caught or see how far they can go. Domain admin is the domain is the globe for Skynet. However, even with these lofty goals in mind, we decided that Skynet will also probably be very lazy. The best hackers are lazy. Did anyone disagree with that? I think if there's code already on Stack Overflow that does what I need to do, guess what? I can copy paste with the best of them. I don't know anything about upgrading Python 2 to Python 3, but I can copy paste Python 3 code like it's nothing. So we think Skynet's going to follow the same way. They're machines. They look for efficiencies in the world. They're not going to build a whole class of Terminator that are like malware authors that are sitting off to the side looking for vulnerabilities. They're going to look for ways to take advantage of the systems that are already in place. We think they're going to probably most likely utilize tools that already perform system functions that they're going to want to do as well. And that's why we came to the conclusion, hence the talk of, they're most likely going to use sysinternals. And there's no reason that as badass red teamers, you guys can do the same as well. Blue teamers, we'll talk about how to catch them.
So what's so great about sysinternals? Well, first of all, well coded. I mean, Mark Rusinovich, enough said. It's been maintained for years and years. Supported XP through Windows 10. Matt called me out on this. Like, if you go to the SysInternals website for some of these tools, it'll say Windows Vista to in Grader, but that stuff's going to run on XP. Even some of these go back to Windows NT 2000. Let
me actually pause, Brian. Who here is still running NT in your environment? Everyone, look around for your next target. Anybody? No? All right. It's okay. You don't have to admit it out loud. I've got issues too.
So yeah, they're nice and portable. You can just grab whatever you need, bring it with you. You don't need to install no dependencies, anything like that. If you forget to bring it, just pull it down from TechNet. No problem. They'll go through. It's Microsoft. Typically allowed by any type of intrusion detection. That includes AV. A lot of times AV whitelists all these because they're just administration tools, really.
Who here knows SysInternals is used in your environment? Anybody? I'm assuming some folks here are tuned into security. Yeah, okay. If you're looking for evidence of attacker activity and you see SysInternals, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? Probably an admin, most likely. All right, see, we can't change that.
Goes right into the next point, blends in with any of your IT admins are using any of these tools. And from a forensic perspective, we need to kind of find out which are legitimate uses, which are illegitimate, just a total nightmare. From a DFIR guy, I can't believe I'm saying this stuff. And again, few forensic artifacts coming from a DFIR guy. Typically, what happens in the GUI stays in the GUI. I'm not talking about the Windows desktop. You use a Windows desktop, you're writing stuff everywhere. If you search for anything in Windows Explorer, it gets written all over the registry. I'm talking about you launch a GUI like ProcBond, Process Explorer, anything like that. From a forensics perspective, all I can tell is you launched that executable and they use a GUI. Well, what did they do with it? I can tell you what they could do, what it's capable of, but there's nothing logged on this exact timestamp they performed this function with that. No one's ever complained that SysInternals logs too much.
Speaking of which, that actually brings up a good point. From a forensic point of view, anyone know what the hardest to track exfiltration method is? Any thoughts? Control-C, Control-V. Clipboard is really tough sometimes, especially after a reboot. Copy-paste is a good exfil method. So to Brian's point, I can see you launch Notepad. I can see you launch some sort of text editing tool. Maybe I can see that you key press, but I have no idea what you may have copied in or copied out. So it depends on the type of visibility that we have. Brian brings up a really good point, too, about these tools being allowed in most environments. We actually don't demo and walk through this part, but if anyone hasn't used SysInternals before, it's a zip package that you download from the internet. Can't download it from the internet? That's fine. TechNet actually keeps open a whack SMB share that you can connect to at any point in time. whacklive.sysinternals.com. Hey, I didn't download the tools or it's not allowing me to pull down a zip file. That's fine. Just map a share over the internet and just pull them down that way. Even better, you can map that drive and then just run from that drive if you want to as well. So I don't want to get into the discussion of fileless malware because that's a bit of a nomenclature, but it's very possible. You don't have to carry the files and bring them over with you. There's some other reasons to use SysInternals as well. We want to avoid being attackers like this, especially if you want to be stealthy. If anyone here has ever worked in incident response, hopefully some of these files will start to look familiar to you. This is one of my favorite parts about being an incident responder and doing an investigation of attackers and red teams, is all the crap that gets left behind that I get to sift through and I get to make indicators out of and signatures out of whatsoever. All of your support files, your random ass named executables, your DLLs that you think are signature lists, whatever you stole from the latest shadow broker's equation, whatever, some rat you haven't updated the code from since 2006, but admittedly it still works, and then some exploit that someone dropped in. It only worked in a Black Hat demo session that a university spent $1 million to set up, but hey, we'll try it here. Anyways, don't be this attacker. Don't leave all this stuff lying around, please, because we're going to find it, and it's going to lead us to attribution, and then the next thing you know, you're going to be in the Wall Street Journal on the front page, and then the Department of Justice is going to issue sanctions, or they're going to indictments against you, and then we're going to be in a really tough spot. So don't leave this behind. Just use the Microsoft-approved, signed, coded software. But more importantly, Brian, why else should we use SysInternals?
Yeah, so, you want to look like an attacker, you want to kind of stand out and everything, but that's not really what you should be doing. Think, anyone seen Ex Machina? Think like that. Think blending in, looking like a smug IT admin, turning around for a photo. Blend in like him instead of sticking out, looking like, with your Guy Fawkes mask on.
No one questions that guy. They just talk about him behind his back. That's okay as an attacker, because no one's detecting you. They're just talking about you. But that's all right. This is who we want to be. All right. Let's jump into the first
what I was just thinking?
Yeah.
What if you pulled the skin off of Mark Rusinovich and that?
That would be scary. That'd be really scary, yeah. If Brian and I don't surface after giving this talk, you all will know what happened and why that went about. All right, let's start talking about some stages of the attack lifecycle and how we can utilize these things. By the way, if attack lifecycle doesn't mean much, just think kill chain. They're the exact same thing, it's just different branding. We're going to talk about some tools that fall into the PS tools category. Basically, they start with the characters PS. There's a quick disclaimer about any of these. Now, red teamers, check this out. Without any options, these tools will by default be run against your local machine. Good for testing, good for profiling. However, they also have built-in looping and enumeration tactics as well. You can throw in a single host with a whack in front of it. You can actually throw a list of hosts, both IPs and NetBIOS names inside of a text file, throw an @ symbol in front of it, and it will automatically go through those. Who here has ever put PsExec inside of a for loop? That's what we called a waste of time and duplicate use of CPU resources. Or you can just throw it against whack star and hit the entire domain. That's right. It can scan and enumerate a domain and then perform an activity against that domain. So gone are the days of you having to pull the DNS cache and see what systems there are, or working your hardest to load volume shadow copies just to get the ntds.dit out to then maybe possibly parse it. Just let PsExec or PS tools do the heavy lifting. You can also throw in a -u and a -p for all the PS tools except one and actually change your identity as well. So you can actually compromise a low-level account, operate as that low-level account, and issue elevated credentials that you've also stolen for only certain particular commands. We won't go into all the forensic implications, but this saves you creating a lot of artifacts on side of a system. Good example, logging in with a normal user account generates 1 event log. Logging in with an administrative account can generate up to 5 event logs. Guess what? I can find all those, and I can start to see what account you're using and the privileges that you've got.
So yeah, jumping into internal recon, because that's the first thing that the machines will do whenever they land in a domain, start looking around. So the first tool, PsInfo, this will pull local or remote system statistics on the users that are oh, sorry. I jumped ahead to the other side, PsInfo. So if you're looking for a specific target, specific system, maybe you want one with a lot of RAM, a lot of resources. Maybe you want a server that you can do a remote interactive log on without knocking a user offline. Go ahead and scan the whole domain. And this will give you back all the information. If you add the -s flag, it will scan those systems and then give you a list of installed software. Whenever we're doing the research for this, I look at that and I go, that sounds like a reverse port scan. Why port scan when you can tell me all the programs are installed and probably running?
So if you enumerate a domain, what do you, and you look at hostname lists, how do you usually find what servers are doing, right? Sysadmins are really nice. They usually throw DC at the end for domain controller, web somewhere in there, or IIS somewhere in there for a server, SQL for a database server. I'd rather just pull this because I'm going to find all those hidden systems, all those intranet-facing ones that aren't labeled internal web 0102. I'm going to find the ones that are labeled some random letter number combination, but are actually running IIS 6. And boom, I've just found another exploitable method that I can jump in via. Also throw it a -C, gives you a nice little CSV output. CSV means we can what? We can script it, and then we can bring it back, and we can analyze it, and we can actually build our attack as opposed to just running on the fly.
So now, here we go. PS logged on. See who's logged on to a local or the remote system. It's the equivalent of like the Linux POO, W. And so if you're targeting a specific account, I don't know, like John Connor or an IT admin or some target, this is how they're going to do it. Sarah Connor,
yeah.
Whoever they're going after.
Kyle Reese. Right, that guy too. This one is fairly straightforward. This is a really easy command. Can anyone think of why this may be useful? What do we want to dump from a system that we've infiltrated? Usually passwords or credentials. It'd be nice to know to see who's actually logging in, to wait for those. So that gives us the opportune time to actually dump those credentials instead of coming back at random intervals. And I see a lot of attackers and attack groups do this as well. They don't get the creds they want on the first or second time. Very rarely does a phish lead immediately to the domain controller. Although I've seen that too. I've seen email being read on a domain controller and then it's just lights out. But very rarely do attackers get right there. So they wait. They sit and wait for someone to log on. This little tool tells you who, maybe gives you their privileges, and also tells you if they're remote or if they're local as well. So as an attacker, if I see my domain admin coming in remotely, well then maybe they've got a jump box I can go and pwn. Maybe they've got something that sits at a central point that I can go after.
So now logged on sessions, this is kind of like PS log on just on steroids. So this will give you all the active sessions on a given computer. So starting in Windows Vista and forward, each user, if they're administrator, they would have 2 different sessions. One is the underprivileged, and then the one is privileged. So this can help you target. This can help you target an administrator. Shell's running with administrator privileges. If you add the -p switch to find out which process.
So we actually, we use the -p switch. I don't know if it's too tough to read on the slide, but what we've highlighted there is a user that has both a command line. So we've got CMD and conhost, and then they've got regedit. What's regedit? Registry editor. What do you need to have registry editor open? Admin privileges. So now we can start to identify admin context as well and see if our account actually has it or if they're having to escalate to a different account. Good example, my corp laptop. My regular username and my admin username are 2 different usernames that we've got. Usually there's an ADM or a -admin thrown somewhere in there. Really good way to identify that is to run a command like this and see what sessions and processes they're owning.
Another thing you may run into, little Easter egg, if an IS or some other service is running in that privileged session, game on.
Yep. Thank you, web server as root. All right, so another tool that we really like is AD Explorer. Unfortunately, we're getting into more of a GUI mode now. And by that I mean you're actually needing to load something. There are command line options, but they're not as versatile. The first one is AD Explorer. This is one of my favorite tools inside of SysInternals for the sole reason of I can snapshot an Active Directory, save it to a file, and then go open it somewhere else. So I'm spending less time on my target, in my target environment or on my target computer. I can profile that domain and get out of there. I've worked with a lot of attack groups that actually have a very methodical way of getting into an environment, hitting the domain controller, dumping statistics. Red team, let me know when this sounds familiar. Dumping domain objects, enumerating them. They're on this central box for hours doing all this recon. Run one tool, save it, and then get off the machine and go back somewhere else. Leave your backdoors in place, leave your persistence mechanisms in place, and then come back and then effectively compromise the environment instead of sitting around and hoping the sysadmin doesn't log in and block you off and catch this one open. The second one is share enum. Obviously for share, short for share enumeration. This one is another one that allows you to enumerate file or printer shares, access levels, as well as local paths. Again, if you're performing a recon in an environment, what do I have access to? What is mapped, what is not mapped? Or I don't understand exactly what this folder is or what it's telling me. You can use this tool. You can actually also use it to look at every domain that system has access to, or you can focus in on domains as well. So you can use these tools to zoom in and out as you're profiling an environment.
Another good recon application from the network side, TCP View. Nice, easy GUI, tells you every process that's running, all the connections making to it. With the GUI, you're able to close connections and terminate processes. Again, from within that GUI, I wouldn't be able to tell forensically, was something terminated, when was a connection closed. It's just fair game.
This screenshot's a little tough to read, but it is a list of executables and then TCP versus UDP, what they're connecting to, whether it's open, the status of the connection. It's netstat-ANO on steroids and in a nice little GUI as well. The other part I like about this from attack points of views, though, is let's say you've got a box that you've been compromising for days. Who here keeps track of the exact number of interpreter sessions they've got open? You know to a T all the time. Run a tool like this really quickly. Okay, how many shells did I actually pop on this box? How many ways did I get in? Use this as a nice little cleanup method. We don't mention it in anti-forensics, but I like it from that aspect too. I've been in some cases, I'm sure Brian's seen the same, where we've seen active attacker connections from like 6-7 months ago. They're not being used. They were initial shell pops, but they're still there. They're still running. Don't be a sloppy attacker. Skynet would close all of its ports if it could.
So same thing as TCP View, just from the command line. If you don't want to use that nice fancy GUI, again, CSV output that you can script that, parse it.
Another screenshot, a little tough to read on this one. But yeah, a couple options. Network connections, listening ports. It's the same thing as TCP View, but with a little more detail into it. The one I like about this is it actually also resolves remote hosts for you. You can skip that if you'd like, but it's just another way to profile more of your environment. Yeah.
So another thing, I can't believe I'm saying this, but one of the processes, Dropbox.exe. Okay, so they're running Dropbox in the environment. How am I going to exfil? Right there. It's not nice to differentiate what was the malicious exfil versus him just syncing his entire Dropbox folder.
Also, I like to use Dropbox and things like Google Drive as a really good example of determining whether or not cloud servers are accessible from the environment. Dropbox may be running. That's great. Maybe it's a corporate app. Maybe it's being used by the employees. Maybe it's being used legitimately. It also tells me that AWS is most likely accessible as well. So it lets me profile and see what's going to be open. All right. We've profiled an environment, used some sysinternals tool. We now know a lot about a domain, and we really didn't need much. We didn't have to drop any custom things in. Everything just ran perfectly. Let's talk a little bit about executing some additional malware. So, well, first one we're going to look at is PsExec. Who here has heard of PsExec? When everyone, there we go. There's all the hands that we wanted to see earlier. So like one red team guy, 4 blue teamers, but like 30 people have heard of PsExec. All right, I like this. I will have to tell Mark that he's got a lot of fans in the crowd. PsExec is kind of, when people think of sysinternals, they think of this tool. And PS Tools actually gets labeled as PsExec as well. It's used for remote code execution. It's used in software deployment mechanisms. It's used by sysadmins legitimately all over the world. It's also used by attackers all over the world as well. You can use it to run a system command. You can push a custom binary. You can change permissions. Again, we talked earlier about the -u-p. You can run it against a host. You can run it against a domain. But red teamers, you need to know that when you run this, you create a very specific, uniquely identifiable forensic artifact, which is PsExec SVC. You can't just run a command on a remote host. PsExec actually drops this little executable on the target system. That executable handles whatever it is you're trying to do, and then it gets deleted and it gets removed immediately. We're going to talk about what artifact that's left behind a little bit later. The -s flag in PsExec is what you use to push a custom binary. You can use H to run with elevated tokens of the user account that you're running with. Anyone know what the -r switch does, aside from just reading the slide? It lets you change the service name that it gets installed with. I'll show you from a forensic point of view what that looks like as we go a little bit later on, but this is a good anti-forensic method to hide yourself. And then -w lets you set the working directory on the remote host. Change the directory that I drop files into. By default, PsExec drops into Windows or your system root. We want to maybe change into a temp directory, maybe something that's not monitored. Maybe you know that they've got bit9 in the environment and you know that program files is whitelisted. Guess what? That's where I'm starting to drop all of my stuff because the application's not going to be looking there.
All right, so now we're going to jump into background info. This is one of the best sysinternals you guys have probably never heard of. Okay, so BG Info is just a little tool that's used to you run this, and then on your on your desktop has little basic information like your host name, how many CPUs you have, RAM, hard disk.
Who's run into this annoying text before on servers? Okay. Sysadmins love this one. They love to have that little text box in the upper right-hand corner that lists all these stats.
Okay. So if you want to go just beyond what they give you in the box, as far as listing information about your system, they give you the ability, it's kind of small, you guys might not be able to see that.
We'll walk through it.
The ability to run WMI or VB scripts.
So let's back up. Inside of the GUI, so to the right side of the screen, left side of the screen, there's an option to customize fields that you drop in. Inside of this field, there's a custom button. Custom leads to new. New leads to this little text box on the side here. Slides will be available afterwards, but trust me when I tell you. The bottom portions of the text box there let you drop in a WMI query if you want. You can drop in a VBS script if you want. Registry keys. Let's see, environment variables. All things that malware authors love to use. And in fact, this was actually recently discussed for application whitelisting.
Yeah, so just let that sink in. This is a signed Microsoft executable that allows execution of VB scripts. So you can bypass application whitelisting if you're trusting any Microsoft signed executable. This just released the other day and has been patched with the latest.
So you've got to use version or 4.21 or lower. But everyone's always got sysinternals lying around, so I'm sure you can find a.
They might not sign another one of those.
We'll see. But yeah, we kind of really like this. This happened to stumble. This article is 2 days old, so we happened to stumble on this and we're like, oh, we need to add this in real quick. We are aware of the VB script thing, but to see it actually exploited in the wild is awesome. There are folks just popping remote shells all over the place. It's a really, really straightforward mechanism. And like I said, it gets approved and Microsoft loves it. All right, let's talk a little bit about persistence. 2 tools we're going to focus on here. The first is PS Password. This is actually a really simple password changing tool. The reason I like it is because you can target specific hosts with it. So I don't have to necessarily go into the domain controller and change all my account settings there. I can just change local admin in a couple places. Who here has a shared local admin account across your entire environment? Shared credentials, I mean. I can't get a hand up. I'm waiting for targets. They'll pop up eventually. Trust me, they're out. There we go. There's one. They'll pop up. Trust me. This is a good way to compromise an account or create your own account. We see a lot of attackers do this one, especially in RDP attacks. They'll create their own account that they can fly under the radar with all the time. Use this one to distribute credentials to only a targeted group of servers. The other one is move file. So, not so much anymore, but what used to be the most irritating feature about Windows? And I'm going to answer the question because we'd be here all day talking about that one. But it used to be, your system needs to reboot in order to complete steps, blah, 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 blah. What's actually happening is Windows can't overwrite files that are currently in use. It doesn't have the ability to do that. That's actually true for a lot of operating systems, but Windows is kind of in your face about it. So they need to schedule an update. There's actually a queue of pending file operations. This is what it's called pending file operations. Windows builds, it's this list of basically the next time you reboot, what needs to happen. I need to delete this, I need to move this, basically I need to apply a service pack, or I need to apply an application update or something of that nature. Well, move file lets you take advantage of that pending operations list. Now from a sysadmin point of view, you could label it as, I'm going to use move file to maybe change a utility I was using or move it to a certain place. As an attacker, you can say, you know what, on reboot, move my malware to somewhere safe. Somewhere where I know it's going to be, somewhere that's whitelisted, somewhere that AV skips. So I can run it on the system, but if I ever jump into a reboot, move it to where I know. We're going to talk about this in anti-forensics as well. But I like move file because it lets me hide things upon reboot. From a forensic point of view, there's a lot of reasons you'd force a reboot. Some important artifacts get written at a reboot time. As a malware author, I can now hide at reboot time as well. And speaking of anti-forensics, we'll just jump right into how do you hide from people like Brian and myself.
So since we're using the sysinternals, you bring with you sdelete.
Anyone use sdelete or heard of sdelete before? There we go. Okay. Yeah. They're slowly waking up.
Nice little file that you can zero out, a file that you want to get rid of. It will also clear free space. So if you deleted something, you go, oh no, I forgot to sdelete that. If you got the time, you can also zero out free space. It also overwrites the free record in the MFT. So without getting too much into an MFT discussion, which would really put everybody to sleep, no matter how many hurricanes we outsourced. Anyone here think when you delete a file, that's it? It's gone forever? Okay, good, awesome. Everyone has been paying attention, some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure if that was the talk next door or the street. But in any event, yeah. So sdelete actually deletes a file for you. It doesn't just mark that space available for writing. Go ahead. Yeah, and then also one of the patterns you can see from it is that in order to obscure the file name, it renames it with letters of the alphabet, all 26. It does 26 passes, A, B, C, keeps going until Z.
So from a forensic point of view, when we find artifacts like this, we find folders full of zzz.zzz, and it's just zz's all over the place. Sometimes sdelete stops short, and we'll find J's or H's or I's, sometimes S's or T's. It just depends. But usually that's a very good sign of something that we're looking for. I think this screenshot may be a little hard to read for everyone, but this is actually what sdelete looks like. We're going to carry this example going through. Just imagine there's a text file with social security numbers inside of it. And sdelete actually goes through, and then we get evidence of the file being deleted. And then move file as well. We also talked about this, both from a persistence mechanism. Obviously, I'm sure everyone could see how it's an anti-forensics method as well. Move your files, move your exfil, move your shells, move your executables, move whatever upon system reboot. Another good way to keep yourself hidden and to hide things from attackers. Remember that you're utilizing the native Windows functions to move and delete these files as well. It's going to get wrapped up with all the other changes that are happening. So even if someone like Brian or myself wanted to do some advanced MFT analytics and take a look and see if the record numbers lined up or there was something out of place, we're wrapped into 10,000 other changes going on at a time. So it's tough to go back and backtrack if you're using a method like that, as opposed to if you were to just delete it during an active session. Yeah? You could. Well, actually, no, it would depend. It would depend on when the pending file operations are taking place, if the network stack has been initialized or not. So it would depend on that one. Good question. Just in case anyone didn't hear, the question was...
We can also get you a solid answer. Matt has the book, SysInternals Volume 7 right over there, which is highlighted and tagged and everything like that. So
it looks like a doctor's textbook. But no, good question. Just for anyone who didn't hear, the question was, could you schedule this to do network operations or move files across a network to another machine? And I don't believe so, because I don't think it takes place when the network stack is activated, but you might be able to. We'll test that. That's a good question. There we go. Put that down. We got to figure that one out. All right. So we've gone through a few different steps of kind of the kill chain or the attack process. We've got a really good example of kind of sysinternals in the wild here. Told you I'd get you good Terminator screenshots. There's lots of them on here. This one's missing an arm, unfortunately, but that's all right. So, sysinternals in the wild. I used to work for a company that has a name for this group, but I can't use that name anymore, so now I'm just going to call them credit card theft attackers. There's a financially motivated threat group. They use the raw POS malware. You may have seen an article about this. This piece of malware has been in the environment since 2008, and I kid you not, there's an active case I'm working where it was deployed yesterday. So yes, 9-year-old malware still being used. They use a version of PsExec from 2006. I'll get to that in just a second. I apologize that this is one that's hard to read for anyone kind of further back in the room, but this is actually a series of event logs of what PsExec looks like on a remote system. Generates an event log, an event 7045 inside of the system log, says a service was installed, and it drops PsExe SVC, or at least it's supposed to. This group drops a executable called frame package, FRAME-PKG. Anyone know what the legitimate frame package is? Anyone have McAfee in their environment? Wow, not a single McAfee person. No? Oh, you one? Oh, used to. Okay. Frame package is a... What's that? The environment I just left. Oh, okay. Fair enough. Hopefully for the better, sir. Frame package is a McAfee update file. So it actually is meant to look like a legitimate file. And when they go in, the service gets registered as PsExec, but they drop frame package on the system. We actually gave a talk about these guys in October, and after that talk, then they started renaming their files to VXXHJQ service, but they still dropped the frame package.exe. Now, I left from 2006 highlighted on here. Anyone know any history of sysinternals as to why this is actually happening? What's that? 2006 is when Microsoft bought Mark Rusanovich's company and acquired sysinternals. It's the last year that sysinternals was open source, and you could actually get the code and modify it to do what you want it to do. This group is using an 11-year-old version of PsExec, and they're modifying the names of both the services that get installed and the target executables in order to stay hidden. However, they're the only group that does this, and I hope they watch this, because every time I talk about them, they change their tactics in some way. It's the easiest indicator to check. You need one event log and one entry. And after our talk in October, they started clearing event logs after every stage of the attack. But, long story short, a good example of a group that is still actively using PsExec and how they're using it. This is what they use to deploy their malware. They've got a really solid, sound approach. It's been working, like I said, for upwards of 9 years. And we talked earlier about getting credit cards replaced. These guys are probably the reason for at least one of those replacements. All right, so we've talked about it in the wild. Now Brian and I really get to talk about the stuff we love, which is detecting sysinternals. And pretty badass Terminator photo as well.
So you're going to use sysinternals. Here's the catch. You have to accept the EULA. And every tool you run for the first time, you need to accept it either in the GUI by clicking accept or via command line by passing the accept EULA flag. Every execution thereon, it checks in this registry location to see if it's already been accepted, and if it has, it doesn't prompt you again. So from this, we can get a timestamp of the very first execution of that sysinternals tool. This is really good in forensic investigations whenever they want to know the entire scope of exposure. Instead of getting the last execute time, we actually get the first. That one's very important.
Red teamers, delete your keys on the way out the door, and all of a sudden that artifact goes away. But
deleted registry keys can easily be recovered. So unless you're wiping registry keys, still going to find that.
So delete your keys and hope that you get a really crappy incident responder, and you'll be good to go.
The other thing about the EULA was I read it this morning. It's actually in 2 languages. It's in English and French. Because TechNet is serving this out of Quebec, Canada, they provide those 2 languages. And Again, so I'm not a lawyer. Don't take this as lawyer advice, but it doesn't seem like there's anything in there. It's just a standard license of don't redistribute this, sell this, reverse it, stuff like that. It doesn't say anything about misuse and hacking and stuff like that, and it definitely doesn't say anything if you're not human in a Terminator machine that you can't use this. There's nothing in there, so they can accept that EULA.
I would just like to put on the record that we're in New Orleans and Brian woke up and read a EULA this morning. Just going to leave that there.
I guess I didn't drink enough of that, yeah. So another cool artifact is the RDP bitmap cache.
This is actually not a SysInternals tool, nor is it necessarily a SysInternals artifact. But really cool, Brian's got a story about how SysInternals actually helped with this investigation.
So if you do want to get a glimpse into that GUI of what they're doing, and they're using terminal services to remote from a source machine to a destination machine, you will see in that RDP session some cache bitmap files. These can be parsed, and you can kind of reconstruct an image of what the attacker was seeing. And something really cool that happened to one of our investigators, not only have they reconstructed this and said, oh, they're using Process Explorer or they're using AD Explorer, and I can see that, here's some values they got back, and we can kind of tell what they're doing. But there was BG info running on the system they were remoted into. So whenever reconstructing this RDP bitmap cache, we want to say, okay, what machine were they on? Well, guess what was right on the desktop? The host name of where they're RDP'd into.
And in attacks where you've got a lot of lateral movement as well, the registry will store RDP systems that you RDP'd to, but that cycles out. It only has a limited capability. It only stores the last 10. So if you really want to mess up the registry,
logs, they can clear event logs.
Event logs, you can clear those. You can go through the registry and just connect to a bunch of random machines and really throw investigators off the track. But with this, they were actually able to recreate using BG or using the artifacts from BG info. So we found that as like a tertiary method to include sysinternals, but it helped profile lateral movement, which is interesting. So I talked earlier about PsExec and the artifacts that it drops. Another one that we love to use as well is artifact of execution called shim cache, short for the application compatibility cache. If you've ever seen a Mandiant or FireEye webinar, you know this artifact really, really, really well. Shim cache is basically an evidence of execution, and I'll describe it really, really simple. You ship an application with old code. Windows looks at that application and says, hey, there's old code here. I'm going to need to shim in some old code in order to get it to run. All of this happens in milliseconds behind the scenes. None of us ever see the effects. Windows never pops up. Well, hopefully it doesn't pop up and say, hey, FYI, this developer was lazy and they wrote in code from a DLL that we haven't updated in like 3 years. Are you okay with this? They just do it behind the scenes. This evidence is actually tracked and it's recorded inside of this database. This is a good example of a remote system executing multiple variants of PsExec SVC. Now, the one thing I'll note about shim cache is usually an executable is stored in there one time, and when it's executed, it's moved up in the chain. It's stored in reverse order of execution. PsExec SVC, remember I mentioned that's the executable that gets dropped when you run PsExec. Technically, every time you run PsExec against a system, it's the first time this executable has been seen. So these entries get stored. Not only is it the first time the entry has been seen, but it gets created in real-time timestamps as well. It's very tough to timestamp PsExec SVC. So that actually gives us artifacts timing as well, which is very tough to get from this one. Now you may be thinking, okay, are there some ways I can execute artifacts? All right, so I just need to avoid executing malware, right? I can still be safe if I don't execute anything on the system. Unfortunately not. Another screenshot for you. So I talked earlier about Windows looks for code it can shim for you. Microsoft also thought, you know what, we should think ahead and we should look for artifacts that or executables that they may want to run. So Windows actually looks ahead into folders that you connect, terminal services clients, USB drives, anything of that nature, and it says, are you going to need shims for any of the executables in here? It's a logical thought, right? You connected a USB drive with a piece of malware, or with an executable on it. You may want to run that executable at one point in time. Let me check and see if you're going to need any code. This actually is a test that we ran where we connected to a system and mapped over a drive via RDP, and we had sysinternals inside of it. We were planning to compromise that system, collect some domain information. Shim cache actually read them. Over to the far side is all the false, this is going to sound weird, false flags. It's not a false flag, it's false flags that are stored by Windows, they were not executed. They were profiled by Windows upon connection of RDP. So now I've got evidence that someone named Matt has a folder called Matt's admin tools in the root of his drive, and he mapped it over and had sysinternals inside of it. We can capture all of this. Attack groups and attackers get caught with this one all the time. We can actually profile your entire tool set because it gets read. And if it gets read by Windows, guess what else takes a peek into it as well? AV. I've actually seen some attacker toolkits wiped out because they mapped over a drive via RDP, and Microsoft lit up like a Christmas tree and caught all of these executables and then quarantined them all. And then you start to see the attackers not come over with mapped RDP shares anymore because they learned the lesson the hard way.
So shim cache v2. So this starts in Windows 8. AM cache, awesome artifact. Bullet point number 1, SHA-1 hash. As awesome as digital forensics and IR guys.
It's really the only bullet point worth mentioning.
Right.
Now we get a hash of your malware.
File size is nice. And yeah, but so if you rename any of these sysinternals tools or anything like that, it gets caught in the AM cache. We have the SHA-1 hash. Doesn't matter what you call it. We know you ran it.
So it's on Windows 8 and above by default. However, most domains are still what? Any red teamers? Any thoughts? 7, 2008 domains. Anyone still messing around in 2003 domains? I can't get people to admit. Darn it. I'm going to find one of these days. I've been in some 2003 domains, but yeah, most of the days they're 2008, so it's very rare, or at least it's starting to become more commonplace that you've got a Windows 10 filled domain. There is a patch, there is a service pack, or not a service pack, but a KB that will do Amcache on Windows 7, but it's not as widely seen as we'd like it to be.
So now here's that social security numbers.txt file from earlier, our example. So we S-delete it. It's gone. It's zeroed out. It's been renamed 26 times. We can't recover anything, right? Well, if it's been accessed, then there's a link file that gets created of recently accessed files. In that link file, there's a stream which tells us the file size. So this would be really good to know how much data was in that social security number.txt file that was wiped. We can recover that, as well as the USN journal. If we respond quick enough, the journal will have every single operation that's been performed before S-delete wiped it, and then we have all that. We have the $I30 index files. That's the B-tree structure of the NTFS file system. We can recover dates and times when that was placed on the system, things like that. You guys are pretty sharp, so I'm going to throw this out to you. We just messed around with this morning. Can you S-delete S-delete?
Any thoughts?
So you go to burn down.
Who says yes? One yes. Who says no? All right.
So you
there's
go
like
to burn,
8 people awake here.
You go to burn down your entire SysInternals toolkit after you're done with S-delete, and then you go to delete the last one, and it airs out and says, cannot get a handle on an active process to remove it, so you can't.
You can't S-delete.
And then in the conversation with Matt, I said to him, oh, well, then you just delete it, and then you can run it clearing slack space, clearing free space, and then you'll get rid of it. And he goes, but then you have to delete S-delete.
It's
That's
still
how
there.
You clear it. So
because of this exact reason, a lot of attack groups leave behind one file, sdelete.exe, because it's the one thing they couldn't get rid of at the end of the day. And that same group that has modified PsExec, they actually leave sdelete behind in the Windows directory, and for that reason, they can't get rid of it. Yeah.
You can't run it off the live SysInternals?
You could.
Memory only?
You could if you wanted to, but if you're running off of there, you're not deleting it on your system. So technically, I suppose you could if you ported all these tools onto a system and then you connect to the UNC path to then go back and delete everything. You could go that route. That could work. Yeah, that could definitely work.
never put it on.
But then you got to go delete the registry key as well. So there's a little bit of extra cleanup you got to do. But you're right. You could look at it that way. Again, the slides will be made available, but what you're seeing on the far side of the screen there is actually the rotation of S-delete going through A, B, C, D, E, F, the entire alphabet as it goes through. Yeah. Now you're thinking. There we go. See? Look at that. We just hid S-delete. Yeah.
I have another question. So I've seen a lot of groups based on the software, right? But I was just talking about NolaCon. So let's say you're talking to PsExec that would modify
So I do not remember the exact range, but basically I think it's 4 ports that PsExec requires, 137, 138, 139, and there's one I'm missing, maybe 445, I'm not sure. But if you're monitoring that type of internal traffic, then you'll be able to see PsExec going across. You'll be able to see the commands in plain text. PsExec actually only encrypts the credentials. And for a while, even that wasn't being done. They were being sent as plain text. But the commands are easy to see. You just got to be able to parse that traffic. The issue with what you're saying is a lot of organizations do not capture or even look at internal to internal traffic at all, so it's very tough to see. But you're right. With either updated versions, either pre-2006 or updated ones, you'll see the commands, you won't see the creds, but you can flag on those structures as well. Correct. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So if anyone here is doing internal network introspection, you can look for this stuff, but that's a lot of traffic. Yeah. Like from captured network traffic? There may be. Jackie made a good point. Bro is one that does have a built-in analyzer to it that you could use to pull that out. There are like SMB ones. Whether or not you'd get a PsExec session recreation, that I do not know. If not, Network Miner might. I'll be honest with you, I have long ago stopped trying to remember everything Network Miner can do because it's got a lot of features built in. It may be able to, but don't hold me to that. It'd be a tough session to recreate.
It also depends on the volume. I know in SANS, whenever they teach the networking class, I didn't take it, but from one of the net wars, they give you a PCAP big enough to break Network Miner, just so the students aren't using the nice easy GUI.
Now, if you, sir, are volunteering to write all of us a SysInternals recreation tool, we will all just follow you on Twitter and hound you every day for those updates and those commits. With that, we'll get to our final piece, which is Judgment Day, and this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek slide because that's it. That's the end. So thank you all for coming today. Obviously, any questions anyone has, we'll be happy to answer. But please make sure you continue to enjoy New Orleans. And again, thanks for coming out.